Renato, and I'll be talking about user-focused API design. So, in this talk, we'll cover API, user interfaces, user experience, developer experience, UX process, and API design. So, as I said, my name is Renato Oliveira. I'm from this city here, Recife. It's a city in the Brazilian Northeast, an always sunny city, not like Philadelphia. And I'm a co-founder at LabCode Software Studio. And my main job is to complain that I'm not coding as much as I would like. I've organized a few conferences in Brazil, from local meetups to a Brazilian PyCon. And I'm a proud member of the Python user group from my state. I'm also working with Python in Django for almost 10 years. So, about LabCodes, we're a software studio based in Brazil, and we specialize in creating custom web products fitted for specific needs. I'm a bit nervous, sorry. We believe that software should be built by fulfilling user and client expectations, and our software is always aimed at solving problems and optimizing process. I'm here in New York until next Friday, and I'm more than happy to talk more about what we do. And it's a pleasure for us to be speaking and sponsoring this conference. A small disclaimer here, I'm no designer. I had my share of a bad and good experience with APIs, and I know and work with some great designers. So I convinced myself that I would be able to talk about it. So, I would like to start with this statement. API is a user interface. It may be clear for some, maybe won't be clear for the others, but let's break down a bit. So, API. API stands for Application Programming Interface. It's a communication protocol between a client and a server, and when it's called, it can return a response in a specific format or initiate a defined action. API simplifies programming by abstracting implementation and only exposing objects or actions that the user needs, that the developer needs. API can be web-based, libraries, operating systems like POSIX, which exposes an API for programs to interact with the operating system, or databases. But in this talk, we'll be talking about web-based APIs. Web-based APIs are a programmatic interface made by a set of public exposed endpoints of a defined request-response system. It usually HTTP-based server. About user interface. User interface is the space where humans and machine interact with each other. They can be like both physical, like this remote control, a car wheel, or they can be logical, like browsers, web pages, and even your APIs. APIs mean a developer, a user, usually a human, interacts with a machine, okay? But why we tend to ignore this fact? I have two guesses. The first one is that there is one-time interaction from the developer with the API. And the other guess is that they are invisible. Yeah, like APIs, developer tool, infrastructure as a service, they're all invisible products. We don't have like a graphical user interface to interact with on a day-to-day basis. Also, we tend to ignore the fact that other people will use our API. Be it a coworker, a customer, or a partner. Other developers will put some time and effort to work on something that you designed. And this one-time relationship is a key point for the success of your API, be it a product or other thing. So, how can I make things easier for my user? That's where user experience enters. User experience bounds all aspects of the end user interaction with the company services or business, services or products. It tries to meet the exact user needs, and with elegance and simplicity, we can create like interfaces that are a joy to use. So it's more than just give what the user asked for, it's basically give what they need. And it's not just UI design. A great UX merges smoothly different disciplines, like engineering, marketing, psychology, graphical, and interface design. It's like to leave your user in a maze and guide them to the exit, and if you do a good job, they won't lose themselves. But what do I need to improve my user experience? Look, I don't know how to drive. I only know some parking signs in Brazil, but I wouldn't dare to park my bicycle here. I don't know what I should do here. But there, even though I'm not sure if I could park for free for an hour or just park for an hour, I know what I shouldn't do. So it's not just about the pretty interface. It's more like to give a clue to the user what they should do and what they can do. So also APIs, no, not APIs, UX cuts down development costs. It's cheaper to change a prototype than working software, right? The design process is based on feedback. And feedbacks, the earlier, the better. So we can make changes before we invest so much time and effort and money on it. It also increases value, because if we create a joy feeling from using our interface, the customers will be more likely to pay. But UX is not UI only. In fact, the users can be misled by your UI. Your interface could not be reliable. And this is the UX honeycomb. It gives us 7 values that interface should give to the user to have a great UX. So it should be usable, useful, desirable, valuable, findable, credible, and accessible. But how can I use all those shiny pieces on my API, on my interface? That's where developer experience enters. Developer experience is kind of user experience for developers. It describes the experience developers have when they're trying to integrate with your product, be it a client library, SDKs, frameworks, open source code, tools, or APIs. We often forget that developers are users too. And we can also apply some UX techniques to improve our developer experience. So we can, that said, we can go through a UX process to, designers have been creating great experience for years and years. And we can take advantage of their knowledge to help us to create great interface as well. So this is a basic UX process. We go from understanding to research, sketch, design, implement, and evaluate. Usually, a UX process is cycle. So when you do everything, you go back to understand the next big feature you need to create. But OK, understand you have to interview stakeholders, understand the value, understand the scope, understand the problems. When you do that, you need to start researching. And you need to start researching, you need to remember you're not the user. Usually, when we start building APIs or interface or wherever, we tend to do that for an external versions of ourselves. And users are very different. They can be Java users, mobile developers, JavaScript developers. They can use different protocols to interact with your API. They can prefer XML over JSON. Users are different. So we need to understand their needs. And also, research is a place to test hypotheses. So like I said, it's cheaper to change a prototype rather than working code, but it's cheaper to ask and test the users on what things we think they want. So after research, we gather the ideas together, we synthesize the user behavior, and I think our users will like this. It's different than 8 out of 10 users tend to want this. So the gather ideas is where you put your metrics together and start building your interface. Oops. So after the gathering ideas, we have the sketch. That's where we start doing some wireframes, some prototypes, and we test the prototypes. So we can have the earlier feedback and change whatever we need to change. After that, we go to the actual design. So the designers can start creating high-fidelity prototypes and create the UX guidelines. Then we implement that. So we start developing functionalities and build the experience. After that, we evaluate. So when we build the experience, we put them to the users to use. And we start identifying improvements on our interface with metrics and usability testing. But OK, how can I use UX to improve my API DX? The first thing that I think of is personas. Persona is one of the outputs of the understanding phase. Usually, like I said, we build APIs for an external versions of ourselves, but we need to understand that there are multiple ways to do the right thing, not only yours. So we have different developers from different backgrounds, and we need to understand who they are and how we can help them. So we have different backgrounds. So front end, mobile, back end, be it client, teammate, public users, all those need to be taken care when you're designing an API. Also, testing and feedback. So testing is basically, the sooner the feedback, the better. So when you put your API for developers to use, you get feedbacks. So you can spin up a trial server, not trial, but a server with a set of predefined response and for each call, and ask your teammates, your beta users to test it, and they can provide feedbacks for you, and those feedbacks are really valuable. OK. Sorry. Also, documentation. Documentation is where you start giving clues for your user to leave the maze. This is a research that Swagger did, asking developers, I think it was 3,000 developers, what was their top 5 things they look on API docs. So we have examples, status and errors, authentication, error messages, and HTTP requests as the top 5 that the developers look for. So examples. Sorry. So from the discovery phase, from the research and stuff like that, you know what the key use case that your user needs. So you need to document that on your API. Also, authentication. And with all that, you can decrease the time to first call. So it's the time that the user takes from discovering your API and doing the actual first call on it. And there is this rule, is 3:33, which means it's 3 seconds to understand the purpose of your product, 30 seconds to read how to use it, and 3 minutes to do the first call. So this is a great rule to follow when you're designing your API docs. Also, errors. Errors, I think, is the most important part of your API because it's the first interaction every user have on your product. The first time you use an API, you will get an error, okay? So try to educate your users with that. Error message should like be descriptive and point to your docs of like where they can solve solve the error. Also, code samples is where you create empathy with your user. If you don't know how a user will use your API, it's hard to think on their problems. It's time to put yourself on someone else's shoes. And also, if you create client code and SDKs, it will decrease your time to first call as well. And we also need to remember that your API docs is also an UI. So you need to remember that your user need to be able to explore it. So making things readable, and working on information architecture is a key point of that. Metrics. So when you deploy your API, you need to start measuring it so you can get later feedback on how to improve your API and your docs. Not your API per se, because it's hard to be incremental on API design because our users will only use it once. So they won't be expecting new features to develop the integration again. But you can use metrics to improve your API docs. Like errors on your API calls can give you hints of where you should improve your API docs. So people are getting errors on test servers. They probably are not understanding well on how to use it. Also, most used endpoints could give you a hint as well on where you need to give more examples of code. Performance is a key point of every of the success of every API, because the performance of your API could decrease the experience of your users. So keeping an eye on that and improving it constantly is also very important. And user agent can give you a clue on what client libraries you need to build next. And a conclusion, think upfront on your developer experience, because you cannot do it incrementally, because developers will use it once. And your API is your way to communicate with the developers. So we also should respect industry. We also should respect we also should respect industry standards, because UX design is also about patterns and standards. So keep an eye on status codes, nouns, verbs, but remember that API design is not just that. It's think on a user. Thank you.